everybody, and welcome to another episode of the OSINT Curious Webcast podcast. I am one of your wonderful hosts. We are literally making the Brady Bunch here. We need two more guests with their video on, and then we have the Brady Bunch. I'm so excited with this. Those of you listening in the podcast, you have no idea what's happening. But, you know, in a Zoom meeting, we almost have 9 videos going, and that's the Brady Bunch configuration. So I am Micah Hoffman, and I'm highly caffeinated. And I'd like to introduce some of the people that you'll be hearing on this show. Let's go over to John TerBush.
Hi, everybody. John TerBush, the Gumshoe on Twitter.
Welcome,
here's
John.
Nixintel.
Yeah? Oh, no, not Nick. Don't pick Nick. He's last. Let's go to Lorand. Lorand, say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Yeah.
Cool. And Rae Baker.
Hi, Rae Baker, Wondersmith_Rae on Twitter, and I'm glad to be here.
Good having you, Rae. And my bald buddy, Nico. Say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody. Dutch Ocean guy here.
Cool. And last but certainly not least, Nixintel. Nix, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody who you are?
Hi everyone, it's Nixintel. I'm on Twitter at Nixintel. I'm really glad that you can join us either on the podcast or the webcast. And I'm going to introduce our guest for today, who we're really excited to have on the show. We have Jane Litvinenko from BuzzFeed News. Jane is a senior reporter at BuzzFeed, and she specializes in dealing with digital verification and disinformation, and she fights the fight every day dealing with fake news and things like that, and we're really glad to have her here. So Jane, first of all, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. I know you're really, really busy. So I guess maybe some people are familiar with your work and some people maybe not. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you do at BuzzFeed?
Yeah, so I have been looking at disinformation at BuzzFeed for the last 3.5 years or so, and we do a few different things. One is we do breaking news responses to disinformation. So this means if something huge happens, like say the Notre Dame catches on fire, we immediately seek out the bad information that is out there, because of course the information vacuum means that there's more disinformation in early hours than there is real information. And we pull that together in a running article as well as a running thread so that people know what to watch out for online. So we do sort of rapid verification responses during breaking news situations. We also do online investigations into disinformation networks. So this means anything from pro-UAE accounts to sort of hyper-partisan networks that we dig into and sort of try to show how they're using social media to promote their influence, where the little untruths are, and sort of that more network mapping work to really drive the point that disinformation is not a one-off occurrence and can really be a systemic problem.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, digital verification seems to be a really high growth area as the whole online investigation world has grown so much in the last few years. How did you get into sort of open source internet investigation in general? How did that start for you?
I like to joke that it started by me being Ukrainian. I'm a Ukrainian immigrant, and of course, Russia is a big fan of testing out tactics on Ukraine before taking them globally. So a lot of the stuff that we see in the disinformation environments, we saw first in my home country. Professionally, I was a media critic before I was a disinformation reporter, which sometimes meant sort of mapping the way conversation online happened and how news outlets, especially in breaking news situations, sort of could get it wrong, but later corrected it, but how that narrative flowed. So when it came to BuzzFeed, in November 2016, I got to work for Craig Silverman, who is sort of the grandfather. He's the boomer of disinformation research. I hope he's listening because I plan on insulting him a lot during this hour. He has already developed a lot of network mapping techniques that he showed me as a way of jump-starting sort of disinformation research. But because I had the background in media reporting and also was and am incredibly passionate about online security, it sort of became a really natural skill set. So I've been doing this for 3.5 years now, and now without Craig's help.
That's really interesting. I always think it's really interesting to hear how people got into this world, and there's no sort of typical career path, I guess, and you just sort of come across it. So when you're doing your job, when you're in BuzzFeed and you're getting these stories which are coming at a really high speed and high intensity to you, what are the steps you take to verify and corroborate something? So that's a really important part of internet investigation, is making sure that, you know, we're getting to the truth. We're not just accepting everything at face value. What are the steps you go through when you try to verify something?
So my very first step before verifying something is finding it. And here is where crowdsourcing has really been an incredibly key tool for me on social media. So I have sort of really gotten used to doing a call out for any disinformation that people may see in their communities. I do this call out on Twitter, but I also have played with doing it on Reddit and on Facebook, and getting people to text me disinformation if they get it from their group chats. And that part is really important because there's just no way to be everywhere all at once online. And even if there was a way, people are so ingrained in their online communities that very often they see things that I might not catch. And over the years, it has gotten pretty cool because people have gotten like really good at verifying things before even sending them to me. Whereas earlier it was sort of just this like onslaught of garbage memes. Now it's like, oh, I saw this meme, but I didn't tweet it, and I tried to do a reverse image search on it, and here's what I found. And anyway, here's my research. Please enjoy. So that part has been really, really cool and really interesting to see as audiences are sort of gaining this like OSINT literacy, right? For me, especially in breaking news situations, the tools that I use are pretty basic. Reverse image search is really key, as is InVid for video verification, which there's a lot of out-of-context video in breaking news situations. But we also use services like domain tools to dig into websites, and reverse analytics search to find networks early on. Creative Googling, or the magic that HangBS does with Google Dorks is also really, really important in those breaking hours. So that's sort of the very rough, very unofficial process that we go through.
Can I also just quickly ask about, because Nix was talking about the breaking news environment, and sometimes things happen really fast. Do you also have like a special standard operating procedure once you have, you know, a video, and then you know, okay, you have to deliver like in 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and then you know step 1, step 2, step 3. Do you have something like this, or?
Not particularly. We generally play it by ear. So one of the things that we look for example, during the Soleimani death earlier this year, the Soleimani killing earlier this year, is it's really important for us to keep in mind the things that we know, right? So something that can help us verify things very, very quickly. One is, what was the time of day? What was the weather? What was the area in which it happened? That way, just by looking at a video, you already know whether you can or cannot trust it. The other thing is to have that very rapid toolbox. So having a reverse image search and having the ability to go through Bing, Yandex, Google very, very quickly, having Invid to break down those thumbnails to go backwards is really, really quickly. But it all depends on the type of disinformation that we see in the moment, which of course we can't really predict. So with Soleimani's killing, it was actually quite easy because most of the fake images making the rocket launch response look impressive were like very old images that were taken from Donbass or like video games or like YouTube videos, like, you know, it was very rushed. But with something like COVID, it's much trickier because there's a lot of science involved and you have to pick up the phone and call an actual expert. So it really depends on the type of disinformation that we see.
I have a question, and this is probably going to be very basic for you, and I know you've answered it other times, but if you could just give us a brief, what is dis versus misinformation? What does that mean?
Yeah, so disinformation is the deliberate spread of bad, false information, and misinformation is the accidental spread of false information. So when you think about it, disinformation is somebody spreading false information for profit or for political reasons, or say a state-sponsored troll farm. Misinformation is when your grandma says that you should garlic make your COVID and passes that on to a group chat.
Wait, that doesn't work? Your grandma.
Garlic has a lot of health benefits and you should definitely eat it, but curing COVID.
Colloidal silver.
Colloidal silver, the bane of my existence.
Rub it all over.
I have a little follow-up there on kind of misinformation, disinformation. We also have nation states like Russia that actually hack and leak data. What are some of the things that you do to validate something, and then what do you do if you find out it's actually valid, maybe stolen information?
Yeah, that part is really tricky, and it takes an entire newsroom to come to a decision on what to do with leaked data. I personally have not worked with leaked data too much, so I don't have a sort of protocol in place. But there was a really interesting case a couple of weeks ago where somebody took known breaches that are already out there, compiled them all together and claimed that it was a fresh hack of the World Health Organization, the Bill Gates Foundation, the CDC. So in that case, we can use a lot of those Google dork tricks to verify the data that may or may not have been leaked. Because I'm a reporter, I also have the benefit of calling up a couple of security companies and saying, what do you make of this? But looking at the details of the documents and trying to understand what a legitimate document would look like and what the difference between that legitimate document and an illegitimate document is very, very key. There was another case where one of my very brilliant Twitter followers, Conrad Iturbe, saw a leaked document that I can't remember whose, I think it faked that Joe Biden had the coronavirus or something like that, but that leaked document had a generic barcode on it. And sort of scanning the barcode on the document or looking at the barcode on the document and seeing that it was a generic copy pasta sort of thing is that was how he verified that document. So that works really well. So sort of looking at what exists and how it could feed into the information that you're seeing in front of you is really sort of the key thing with document verification.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, that's I follow you on Twitter, as I know loads and loads of people do, and you're obviously really, really busy dealing with. So it almost seems like a new conspiracy theory or a new hoax every day. Sort of from this mental, psychological point of view, how do you keep yourself dealing with all that? Because I look at this and I think, she must have the patience of a saint to deal with these, all the 5G conspiracy theories, all that stuff. And you're there doing your open source and your verification. How do you keep going through all the crazy stuff?
Sometimes with difficulty. I think that for me, the key is understanding sort of the different stages of a disinformation campaign that take place after a breaking news event. And you're definitely right that with the coronavirus, it has been a real convergence of basically everybody who's been in the cobwebs online coming out into the sunshine. So for us, something that we saw early on or something that happens early on in a breaking news situation is everybody sort of throws past at a wall, trying to see what sticks. So it's like every type of disinformation that you see, you'll see it within the first like hour to a few days, depending on the event itself. But then what happens is people who are spreading disinformation maliciously are starting to understand what online audiences are responding to, right? Like, what are the anxieties, the fears, the panic, and that emotional aspect is incredibly important. What gets the most sort of the most online response, whether it's shareability, whether it's likes, comments, and they sort of pile on to those narratives. So something that we've seen with the coronavirus is there's been a few different narratives that are sort of now coming together with the 5G, with Bill Gates, with false cures, and all of that really ties into vaccine disinformation, and all of that really ties into anti-lockdown disinformation as well. So understanding how those elements play into one another is incredibly important, and it's something that you get if you're like really elbows deep in this stuff, right? But I think that the other key thing here is to remind yourself that, or at least for me, something that's been really keeping me sane is to remind myself that most people don't really want to fall for disinformation, nor do they want to share it. A lot of it is happening to audiences who are just vulnerable, right? Like people who, like older people who might not have been using social media from the beginning, people who might not be too technically savvy, people who are seeing English language disinformation, but English is not their first language. So understanding how the disinformation is playing onto those vulnerabilities is equally as important and gives me a lot of patience as well.
Can I go into that? Do you see that those audiences are specifically targeted?
We don't know. It's really tricky to understand who is or isn't targeted by disinformation because we don't have a lot of data that could prove it. So most of it is sort of our best guess. We do know from a study from Princeton from last year that the older you are, the more likely you are to share disinformation on Facebook. So if I were a bad actor trying to sort of make sure that my message is spread, that would be the first population that I target. But from what we know of other disinformation campaigns, it really depends on what the goal is. So one of the disinformation campaigns that we know most about is the Russian 2016 disinformation campaign. And I want to be careful here and say that almost every regime in the world has a disinformation disinformation team or PR uses, or, it's not just Russia. But what we do know about Russian methods is that they were targeting specific populations, right? So they were targeting LGBTQ people, they were targeting people of color, they were targeting immigration activists and immigrants themselves, and they were even targeting kids. If you look at the ads that Congress has published, they were targeting people under 18 very specifically.
But targeting as a victim, or targeting as them to help to spread the disinfo? Or just
well, what's the difference?
Well, in my opinion, if you target them as a victim, you are trying to make them maybe muffle their mouth and not say anything more anymore.
Yes, both. So with kids, we definitely saw some advertisements that Russian trolls have purchased to target them at people under 18, for instance.
Okay.
And very famously, they've organized both pro-immigration and anti-immigration protests. So the idea with disinformation is really to, it's less to convince you that something is real or fake, and more to create divisions within society that already existed but might widen that gap. And that's a really important point to latch onto too as we think about who's most vulnerable to this stuff.
Yeah.
Dana, I have a question. Oh, go ahead, Ray. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to go back to the mental health aspect for a minute and ask you, as an analyst who gets most of your information through social media, how do you deal with that when you want to be, like, do you check out entirely from social media when you've had enough?
I do. I have days when I absolutely just do not touch my phone or my computer. I'm very careful about not working on weekends. And I'm also really careful about my online security to the best of my ability, which sort of gives me peace of mind if there's a harassment campaign against me.
Right.
So gardening is my favorite hobby, and both my hands are dirty, so I can't check my phone. So that is actually very, very good for my mental health. But yeah, it does, I do have to take conscious steps to do it. It doesn't, you don't have to you can't just grow a thick skin against this stuff.
Yeah, I would think it gets very overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jane, you mentioned something about essentially these waves, these propagation waves that happen when disinformation drops, whether it's truthful or whether it's hitting its target victim group or not. The idea is to spread. One of the things I've always wondered, and if you have insight on this, please let me know, is can you stop that wave? I know that your organization and PolitiFact and a whole bunch of others puts out great, truthful, factual information. But once that wave of dis or misinformation goes out, can you ever catch it and stop it? Or is it just for those who are looking for the truth, you provide it?
It's a bit of an existential question. And it's really, really tricky if you're a disinformation reporter, because there's a very, very razor thin line that you have to walk. On one hand, we generally see disinformation campaigns before they hit the mainstream. We do a lot of monitoring for online keywords. We go into communities on places like Telegram, Discord, 4chan, and some Reddit channels where we really see the topics that are bubbling up that may or may not spill over. Also private Facebook groups, cesspit. But for us, if we report on them too early, we risk giving them notoriety ahead of their time. We risk giving them an audience they otherwise might not have had. However, and this is particularly, this line really crystallized with this YouTube video Plandemic, which I think you're all probably familiar with, where we saw early seeds of that disinformation video, but it did still take most fact checkers and debunkers about a day to fact check the video. And this includes Facebook fact checking partners, which Facebook relies on to decrease the spread of the information, whether it's by deleting it off the platform or sort of throttling how much it is shown to the audience. And so for people who cover disinformation, there's really sort of no perfect perfect way to go about it. A lot of it is gut instinct. A lot of it is looking at whether things have gotten out of their online ecosystem. But in terms of the impact that it has, something that is quite interesting is that looking at not individual pieces of disinformation, but at very specific, inauthentic, coordinated behavior where people create fake pages, fake accounts, fake groups across social media networks to push that message. What reporting on that does is it informs social media's responses to what these networks look like and what methodology they use. So essentially, their algorithms detecting this disinformation, as well as the departments within various social media networks that look at disinformation, are able to see what those campaigns look like and sort of neuter their future iterations. We've seen this with disinformation networks over the last year, especially. So while it's not a perfect system, and of course, bad actors will continue to try to play social media as much as they can, there is sort of some progress being made in the field.
Can I quickly ask you about debunking in general? So you just mentioned the pandemic video, for instance. Can you shed some light on some of the tactics or approaches you use, and also highlight some of the challenges when it comes to debunking? Because you said, especially in this case, it took a day. With some, it's pretty fast, like a reverse image search. Mm-hmm. What is your view on that?
So the tricky thing, I'll use Plandemic as an example because it's sort of this, it was this big catalyst moment for disinformation, and the social share numbers that we saw on it are incredibly significant. On Facebook alone, it has about at least 20 million engagements from the public tools that we have. It very likely has a lot more. And the tricky thing for us with that video was that the video is 27 minutes long. And the amount of false claims that it makes in those 27 minutes is just unreal. Like, you know, I've watched the video 3 times, and each time I find a new falsehood. It's a gift that keeps on giving. So in order to debunk every single false claim in that video, we would have had to go essentially minute by minute, pull up the most recent science, a lot of which I just don't understand because I'm not a scientist, call up a slew of experts and essentially say, can you explain to me why wearing a mask is not going to get you sick? Can you explain to me why the sand is not a good cure for the coronavirus? I'm extrapolating a little bit, but can the California Police Department explain to me the charges on which the woman in the video was held, right? So the amount of information that you have to debunk in a 27 video is just huge. So one of the ways that we approach this is we look at the history of the people in the video and the people who have made it to help our readers come to a particular decision for themselves about whether they trust the people in the video or not. We still debunk those big claims, the claims that are very dangerous. The mask thing was the reason why Facebook pulled that video off of its platform. So of course we mentioned it. But showing our audience that the people in the video themselves have very spotty careers, have sort of backgrounds that might help inform how they look at that video is very key. And the last aspect is explaining to people how it's spread online. This sort of timeline approach is something that we've had for a few years now. And our audience anecdotally seems to find it really helpful to understand how something went from point A to point B to point C. And this is particularly apparent with something like the Bill Gates conspiracies that we're seeing right now. So with Bill Gates, the social shares that we were tracking in December, January, February were very, very minimal. They were sort of very confined to their own small communities. They were not in the mainstream at all. And then Bill Gates went on Reddit, as he does, and does an AMA. And in that AMA, somebody asks him, well, what would be needed for businesses to reopen? And he says many things, but one of the things that he says is we need to essentially have, this is not verbatim, but essentially have a sort of we need to keep track of who has immunity, who doesn't have immunity, who may have been vaccinated if we come up with a vaccine, not when, but if. And that, since then, from that AMA, the social shares blew up, right? Because people used that answer for all kinds of conspiracy theories and used those words as proof. And explaining to people how that happened and sort of the early people who were latching onto that conspiracy helps them see the bigger picture. And that is really the approach that we try to take with our debunks, really show people the bigger picture of how information spreads online instead of just going after one falsehood specifically.
Now, do you find that debunking has a notable impact, or do you think that people who are going to believe it are just going to dig in and find some way to make it fit their narrative?
Most of the data that we have on that is imperfect. So the short answer is that we don't know. But what we do know is that the data voids that bad information creates need to be filled, right? So if, for example, what's a good one? Early on, somebody was asking whether air purifiers have a marked decrease on the amount of virus that you might be exposed to. And we saw that a lot of people were searching for that and very quickly wrote an article explaining what the answer was. And we do know that people want to know good information. We do know that they're Googling it, right? Like we can see the Google Trends. We do know that they're sort of on Wikipedia trying to make the heads or tails of a situation. So filling those data voids is incredibly important. Whether or not it works at scale or whether or not it works on the same scale as disinformation works, we don't know. We don't have the data for that. But we do know that this is, not a useless exercise, that people still are looking for good information.
Well, because when they actually start Googling whatever's in the video, if they can find your factual information, hopefully that can provide a counterpoint, right?
Right, precisely. And YouTube and Google, which of course is the same company, as well as Facebook, a lot of their methods for fighting disinformation are imperfect, and we can get into that if we like. But they have all sort of started prioritizing good information as soon as that good information comes in their search results or in the sort of decision tree with YouTube of like what they show in the recommendations. So it is really important for that good information to be there and be available for anybody who wants it.
Yeah, and tinfoils are going to tinfoil, right? So if
exactly. Conspiracy theories there is all the time, right?
Yeah. So, but honestly, what you just said, the algorithms, because I did some research in 2016 on YouTube and jihadism and self-radicalism, where basically the algorithm of YouTube sucked them in even deeper. So I can imagine in COVID times, if you're looking for information, maybe to inject bleach into yourself, you get sucked in deeper by videos of that.
So YouTube is really interesting. It's really interesting how the YouTube disinformation pipeline has evolved. You're very, very right that a lot of people who were looking for those sort of more extreme views on YouTube would find them and would definitely go down the rabbit hole. And it is very possible that they came to hold more extreme views. But YouTube, after the problem has been reported on, has worked to fix it. It has worked to fix that recommendation engine that pulled people in that rabbit hole. But what we've been seeing during COVID instead is, instead of the recommendation engine, now what happens is, and this happened with the pandemic, but it's happened with a few videos before it as well, is a video will go up on YouTube. YouTube tells us that this video doesn't get recommended. So if people are searching for the word pandemic, plandemic will not be the first result. If people are searching for vaccines, plandemic will not be sort of the next video up. Instead, the way it spreads is through Facebook groups. And you can really see it with a great tool, one of my go-tos called CrowdTangle, which shows you how information sort of spreads. And if you put plandemic URLs into CrowdTangle, the first results, the results where it spread the most, is all Facebook groups. It is all Facebook groups. So it really goes to show that when one problem begins to be addressed, another problem comes up to take its place. And we don't know whether that's better or worse, because clearly the Facebook group, the YouTube to Facebook group pipeline is extremely effective.
What I find also very interesting is when I watch these videos about these people talking about coronavirus being a hoax, etc., and then they tell the audience, you should Google it yourself. But the fact that you're Googling is also kind of like showing the kind of confirmation bias that exists, that people who are searching for something specifically, I mean, Google will exactly give you what you want. It doesn't show you like the other half. But this is, I think, also like one of the challenges.
Well, specifically also, Lorand, if you put out a video that says, hey, you know, colloidal silver, just to throw that in there, is going to cure COVID-19, and then what I'm going to search in Google is colloidal silver and COVID. So I'm actually possibly causing some of those lower ranked pages to be moved up in Google's page rank just by Googling it. So yeah, good point. We do have a question from somebody in our audience here. They ask, Jane, what's your opinion on the house party disinformation that they are offering $1 million for proof of? Do you know about that?
I do know about that. I don't have any particular opinion about it because I frankly just didn't have the time to dig into it. I saw that there were sort of a few different strands of that narrative where some people were saying that you can hack House Party. House Party then responded with, like, we'll give you a bounty. I honestly haven't dug into it all that much. Every group video service is deeply imperfect, as we know from security researchers. So, you know, pick your poison on that one.
Sure. So what tips do you have for somebody that's starting out, for maybe for our audience, some new OSINTers, some more classically trained OSINTers? If you had like 3 steps to give somebody to check for dis or misinformation, what would those be? And you can absolutely refer to something you've already like recorded or something, some post that you've already made.
So one plug that I really want to make, which you already made last week, is for the Verification Handbook. So the Verification Handbook is a resource that was edited by my boomer colleague. He's not actually a boomer, but he hates it when I call him that. My boomer colleague, Craig Silverman. He got together some of the best researchers in this space to show their tools, not just in a way that sort of lists all the tools themselves, but also shows case studies of how we use those tools, when we would use those tools. That would be sort of the first resource that I would point people to. And that's because depending on the nature of the disinformation that you're looking at, you might be going down a different branch of research. So the Verification Handbook is definitely the Holy Bible. I would say that image verification is also really, really key. We see a lot more images in the context of the disinformation being spread than we do websites. So if you can sharpen your reverse image skills, which sounds basic but isn't, or doesn't have to be. You can really get your hands dirty with that stuff, and get your sort of video geolocation skills, video search skills. That would be incredibly important. But if you don't have time and you're wondering if you should push something forward, every fact checker and disinformation reporter in the world is on the exact same story right now. We're all writing about COVID. So if you don't have time to dig into it, searching for it in a search engine with the word debunk or fact check is a great way to just sort of bring in the good information and look at what the researchers and the fact checkers have found on that topic.
Thank you.
One additional question, because one of our audience just asked the question, or earlier asked the question, do you have an impression that image search algorithms have turned worse over time, especially Yandex recently for faces?
Yeah, absolutely. Yandex has gotten a little bit trickier. Google has gotten a little bit trickier. Bing has actually been my go-to.
No! And that's the show for today, ladies and gentlemen. Pigs are now flying. What the heck?
Wow.
Really? Bing for I love Big Image, don't get me wrong, but wow, that's your go-to.
Especially with things like faces search. They have a really great tool for faces search that I have found to be very handy. I'm sorry, I know.
No, it's okay. We love hearing these other perspectives. Maybe up in Canada, if Bing is awesome, right? Because you only have like 20 people up there, but
Listen.
no, okay, and that's absolutely fine.
Don't drag Canada into this. That's true. We're done. But also using Google Dork's tricks to narrow down the search results within Google is really, really key. Henk van Es wrote an entire chapter in the Verification Handbook on his search magic, trickery. That man's a wizard. So if you're looking to see how you can narrow down your reverse image search results, or the opposite, expand them, that would be the chapter that I would recommend.
Excellent. Other questions for Jane?
I have one. You mentioned a little earlier about, your operational security, and you try to avoid being harassed and stuff. My background is more in investigations and gathering intelligence, which I pretty much always don't want the targets to know who I am. In journalism, this is not always the case, right? You may want them to know who you are. How do you sort of separate this out and maintain your operational security?
Yeah, and not only do we also have a legal responsibility to use our real names if we communicate with people.
Right.
So for me, it's definitely creating some sock puppet accounts that are under my real name, but are not my primary profile. A lot of it is also being really careful with the information that I put online regarding my family. Two-step verification has definitely saved my Facebook account from getting hacked before. But one of the things that I tell people when they're just starting out with OSINT is that the most fun place to start researching is your own profile. So create a couple of sock puppet accounts and try to dox yourself and see if you can. And if you can, clean up your social media presence so that you're not able to do that a second time. And if you can't, then great. But try to beef up your personal security to the best of your ability as well. There's a lot of really great resources on that. If you're just starting out, Citizen Lab has the security planner. It's securityplanner.org, I believe is the website, but you got to fact check me on that, which walks you through all the different social media that you may have and sort of how to lock down your settings on that. So that's something that we use regularly. BuzzFeed is also also has a security team that reporters are able to turn to if something is particularly bad. And unfortunately, with disinformation, people are very passionate about the things that they believe in. And actually, just the other day, I got a message about somebody being mad at me for something that I debunked during the Notre Dame fire, which is why it's front of mind. So people's memories are long with this stuff. So the operational security really is important.
Right, and you're out there, so you're kind of making yourself a target in a way, right?
Of course, and it goes without saying that being a woman, and I'm a white woman, but being a person of color definitely makes things worse.
Well, and also your last name is pretty recognizable, right? Across different platforms. You're not like Jane Smith, which would make it easier for you to hide in all the other Jane Smiths. So it probably is easier to make you a target.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, when I first came to Canada, I picked a name for myself, which is Jane. Jane is not actually my legal name. So I feel like that small benefit of immigration has really benefited my operational security because most people don't know what my full legal name is.
Although there was a video I watched this morning of you being
But can you spell it?
I can't even spell Micah. Are you kidding me? All right. Are there any other questions for Jane? Oh, we always ask this one question, Jane. What's the next thing for you? What do you want to learn how to be better at or to do better within the world of OSINT and dis and misinformation?
So I have been thinking about this question a lot today because I knew that you would ask it. And I know that Python is everybody's go-to answer, as it is mine, and Justin Syed's course has really been helping me with that. But for me, one of the most interesting areas right now is the live maps of global like different global actions that are being taken. So for instance, you can see this is an incredibly nerdy thing, but one of the things I'm obsessed with is undersea submarine cables. So you can see where companies are sort of looking to branch out to before they branch out to there. The boat traffic is really interesting. There's a lot of tools that will show you what imports and exports are coming out of countries right now. And that is something that I'm only just starting to get really familiar with. But those databases are something that I'd really love to be able to dig into more. So if anybody has databases that they want to send my way, or any tutorials or anything along those lines that would be helpful, I would welcome it with open arms.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jane, for being on. I did want to make sure that people knew where to find you. So this is Jane's Twitter page. This is her avatar right here. And if you don't know anything more about her, we also have her page at BuzzFeed News. So thank you, Jane, for being on the show. We'd love for you to stick around. We're going to transition off to some news, and please, there actually are some things here that I think would be right up your alley. So please stick around and chime in. Okay?
Happy to.
All right. So one other thing that Jane mentioned, and I know that she mentioned a bunch of other websites and resources, we are going to put those in the show notes, as we always do, is the Security Planner here by Citizen Lab. This is where you can secure yourself before you go out and do things online. Let's go ahead and shift to Lorand. Lorand, do you want to tell us about the Twitter network that you were investigating?
Yes. So shall I share my screen? Maybe it's easier.
Yeah, if you want. Here, let me stop mine. Go ahead.
All right. So this is something I came across a while ago, and then we launched one of our investigations on Twitter. And then I saw this again. So someone spam replied to one of our investigations. And then I was just curious to see what this is, because it looked familiar to me. So I set up like a DMI TCAT. Maybe I will talk about this a little bit later. Basically, I started to collecting tweets. And what I wanted to do is to understand this network, who they are, how they operate. So essentially, what you can see here is basically that bot network that tries to sell those masks. And then in this thread, I basically walked through the whole investigation that I did, showcasing two important things. So if you just look at this image, it leads you to this website, which entails Amazon. So it might imply that it's legit, but when you click on it, it redirects you to a totally different website. And then I actually found the original website that also had an issue, a notice around fraud awareness. And then I knew that this is kind of like affiliated with fraud. And here you can also see, did some network visualizations with Gephi, and then basically explained how this network operates. And I was just checking earlier. So if we do the same right now on Twitter, I can show you the network, how it operates right now. It's still online. And let me see. Yeah, so as you can see here, so this is one of the tricks I use all the time. In order to find certain networks, I try to put myself in the shoes of these people. So what I want to search for are scams. So if I was interested in buying masks or shopping, I would use keywords like this. And as you can see, if you type in shop mask, you can see these tweets coming in within seconds. So I also mentioned it to Twitter a couple of times that this is currently going on, and how they operate is pretty simple. So all these are parts of a wider network, and what they do, they simply reply with the same tweet. So it's a really simple network, but it's what also Jane was talking about. It's the mass, and they try to tweet out thousands of times in the hope that someone clicks on it and then falls for it. So this is currently what I'm still looking at. And I had an update earlier today, which is basically that I found the fourth account that is still operating on Twitter. So they get taken down and then they come back. And what I try to do is to collect the data on them and then do a big analysis on them to better understand how scammers use Twitter.
Very cool. And you're helping to secure the world because you're getting that disinformation off of the social media platforms where it will propagate.
And perhaps what's also important to some of the listeners or might be of interest are two tools that I used. So one is DMITCAT, and that's actually a blog post written by Dutch OSINT guy here on how to use it, because you did it like a couple of years ago on Gephi and DMITCAT. So I would direct everyone who wants to know how to do that to Dutch OSINT guy.
Well, why don't we go ahead and let Dutch OSINT guy talk a little bit, because Nico, you also made this video talking, kind of bringing back what we were talking about earlier with Jane about the face searching option on Google's image search. You want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, well, I was just annoyed that I couldn't search my face anymore. So I was looking into Google, its search algorithm, and trying to figure out if it was still there. Because if I typed in a person's name and face, it would give me really targeted faces. And then I started noticing when I started using the filter options within your Google image search results. So if you click on tools and you'll see, well, I can show it. Should I show it?
Yeah, if you want to.
Okay.
Go ahead. Let's do it. We're going to go long anyway today, but we'll have so many cool things in here. That's cool.
1 second. Let me find.
I know you said you weren't feeling good earlier, so.
But it's just 1 minute.
I know you like talking about yourself, so that gets you back in.
Thank you. I love you too.
That's not what you were going to say.
So, see my browser? Okay. So what I would do, I would go to google.com and, well, let's say I want to search for a certain individual with a lot of hair. And I get a CAPTCHA. Oh, live CAPTCHA solving, stress.
You can do it. You can do it.
Yes. I wish I was paid for every click I do solving a CAPTCHA. So searching for images, and normally you would do, well, I want to see Micah Hoffman and not see pictures of, let's say, a layer 8 con or this of Jane's. So only pictures of a face. It used to be possible within Google when you clicked on tools and you filtered on type, there you could choose face also. And I was just annoyed that face was gone. So I started clicking and I did clip art, and I noticed, well, it's still searching for the keywords Micah and Hoffman images, and now only clip art, which has somewhere underneath, either in the code, in the blog post or whatever, Micah Hoffman attached to it. So then I started noticing here up in the top URL bar that clip art is still there, and I need to move the little zoom thing. Here you can see clip art. Is this big enough for you? Okay.
We can see it.
So I thought, just very basic, what if I change clip art to face, because I only want to see faces, and I just push enter, and then boom, magic happened. Face is back.
Could you change it to any other word?
Well, I tried.
That's my thought, right? It's like backhoe or something. I don't know. And
I don't know.
And
Fun
Fart.
with URL manipulation.
I did fart. No, it doesn't work.
right now you're flagged by Google.
Yeah. Well, again, no. It only works. So probably it's still underneath in the code in Google's database and the structure, but they just visually got rid of it. So
Right.
very simple. Just choose one of them just because you need a word in here, and you replace that word with face. So now it's line art. Replace it with face again, push enter, and there you have faces of Micah Hoffman.
All right. So the parameter, the parameter is the TBS, Tango Bravo Sierra for face, right? The TBS parameter is IDP,
Yeah.
and then the slash clip art, and you change the clip art to face, but that's in the TBS parameter. Okay.
Yeah, and also in a small 1 minute or more than 1 minute YouTube video I made.
Nice.
So, okay, that's it.
Well done, sir.
stop
Well
sharing.
done. That is cool. All right. Well, speaking of faces, let's go ahead and get back to something that Lorenzo Romani from Twitter put up there, using essentially Gephi, which is the second time we talked about it today. Nico, Lorand, I think we're going to have some kind of 10-minute tip or maybe a portion of the webcast on using Gephi. But Gephi and Elasticsearch and finding faces. This is pretty cool. Lorand, did you want to talk about this?
I think it was someone else put it in the show notes. I mean,
Matthias?
Yeah, well, I think Matthias put it in, but in general, I just think people should check this blog post in its whole out, because it gave me some new ways to think about how to do image recognition with some fairly basic Python techniques, along with Elasticsearch to, well, scale it a little bit. So it's, in my opinion, this is now maybe just above entry-level OSINT, but it's really all about scaling stuff. And well, especially with images and videos being more and more, you need to be able to scale stuff to make sense of stuff. So, and this really takes you by the hand and teaches you every step you need to take to do facial recognition from pictures with some basic tools, which are already out there anyway. It's just you needing to install them in the right order.
Yeah, I would agree with you that some of this, it does look a little bit more advanced, especially when it's like, go to this GitHub repository and download the files. You and I both know that downloading files from GitHub, while it sounds easy, it sometimes requires other things. So yeah, this is interesting stuff. I'm gonna have to try this. But yeah, doing things at scale and at speed, really important. I think Matthias also put this one in. This was a quiz time.
Yeah, I put this in. What I really found really interesting about this one, this is a tweet by Muzaffar Pai, and he basically takes you by the hand how he found a picture from quiz time. And I don't like spoilers from quiz time, but this one I found really important because he used the cropping tool. I think it was in Bing.
Yeah,
so
that's Bing.
Yay for you, Bing.
See, I told you, Jane, we get back to Bing and their image search. Yeah.
And for the podcast listeners, they're trying to find a picture of some kind of apartment block, which has very particular windows. And once you crop a portion of that picture in a certain way, you get 0 or not satisfying results. But if you start cropping the same picture from, let's say, not different angles, but you'll do only in a vertical line cropping or only in a horizontal line, all of a sudden you'll get results which do fit what you are looking for. So for me, this was a really big eye opener that is so important, especially when you do image verification, that sometimes you need to be persistent and try and figure out, can I crop this picture or pieces of this picture in a particular way? Because there's no way for you to know that a certain search engine indexed that same picture in a certain resolution, which can only be found by cropping it in a certain way. So,
well, and this is kind
really
of what Jane was talking about earlier, is, you know, upping your image searching game, right, Jane?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes the other things that you want to play with is flipping the way that the image shows, so that it's not a mirror image. And a lot of the times, especially with fake profiles, we see them take a real photo, but make it like black and white or something like that to avoid image detection. So that's something to be mindful of as well. Bellingcat has a really great walkthrough of advanced image search techniques that I'd recommend.
You just shared all of my ways of creating sock puppet avatars.
I just wanted to clarify. So the tool that we just saw was Google Lens. It wasn't Bing.
Really?
Yeah, it was Google
Yeah,
Lens.
I was going to say that. That was a really good write-up.
It's still the same. I mean, it's pretty cool, and I love Google Lens, especially when you do mobile OSINT, when you're on the train or somewhere.
Nice. Google Lens. I'm going to have to take a look at that. We'll put it in the show notes. Cool. Just a couple of real quick shout outs here. MWOS and Matthias posted this tweet about aerialphotosearch.com and Eurolift build. I know I love to build. I know I've botched that. .de. These sites are good for aerial imagery. We have another website out here, Fagan Finder, that has a massive collection of search engines and resources. It looks very similar to a lot of the Start Me's that we've seen, but if you're looking for other resources, Fagan Finder may have some things that you're interested in. Getting close to last, OSINT Combine, actually, darn that Chris Bolter, he released a tool, and there's a blog post that accompanies it that allows you to essentially take some of the things that we've done here in previous webcasts and in 10-minute tips, essentially harvest information from some source and then plot it online using his JavaScript network type of mapping tool. And he walks you through essentially here how to do this with, I think, one of my favorite sites, viewdns.info, and scraping that data and then looking at when things were registered. Down here it talks about the domain verification and all. So he has a free tool out, and I believe he links to it, and he definitely links it to it right here. Anybody want to mention this? Has anybody used this yet?
I played around with it. I think it's just really nifty to do some quick understanding of larger networks. So if you scrape, like, let's say 1,000 or 2,000 mentions between groups, you can quickly make sense of it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, if you're using Maltego's case file or Maltego's full edition, or you're using Gephi or some other visualizer, I think even I mean, a lot of these visualizers take a lot of data points, show the relationships between them, and allow you to do those CSV uploads. The 10-minute tip I did a couple weeks ago essentially shows how to do that same technique using the free version of viewdns.info and case file. Nico, you want to really quickly talk about your SANS talk?
Yeah, quickly. This is basically the same talk I gave at the SANS Open Source Intelligence Summit back in February. SANS gave me the chance to do an mic last week, so over 250 people attended it. And if you just like open source intelligence and not talk about tools, but more about the way I think you should use your mind when doing open source intelligence, I talk about it for over an hour. So go check it out.
Excellent. And let's see. Another tool, and then we'll get to our last one. This is alicevision.org/#meshroom, which Daniel Gallagher used to create 3D images. Essentially, it takes a whole bunch of stills of an area, and then it will mesh them together. Have any of you used this?
Yes. So I was playing around with it last Sunday. And I think this tool is specifically would be pretty cool for investigative journalists. So if you try to put together like a model, or you want to create a model of a location based on still images. So in my case, I had only 20 images and it didn't produce any good results, but the problem was I need more images. But it looks really, really good and fantastic.
Right. So and maybe it could be used for something like a disaster or protest or something where there are hundreds or thousands of people taking pictures over time. You can get a lot of different perspectives. All right. And then lastly, we've got some bad news that Twitter is changing how tools can access its data. And I think on June 1st, we're going to see some of the Twitter tools that we might have been relying on, things like Good Twitter, things like Twint, either changing or going away because not the flaws, but the way to access different data in Twitter is going away. This happens, and maybe that provides us an opportunity to switch to some other tools, such as those like DMITCat and many others.
Yeah, and like Facebook Graph will survive, people. We will survive. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, we're just a little bit over time, but that's cool. I have really enjoyed talking with Jane. Thank you so much for being on the show, sharing your knowledge with us, and just for being with us for the last hour.
This was the most exciting thing to happen to me all week, so thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thanks to our wonderful panelists and our wonderful attendees. Before we pop off here, we'll go around the horn. Tell me if you have any shameless self-promotions. Nix, we'll start with you since we ended with you last time.
No, I will be on Twitter as usual at Nixintel. Otherwise, I'll be pretty quiet this week in the shadows somewhere.
All right. Rae Baker, do you have anything that you're going to be doing the next week?
I will, in the next week? No. I will be helping teach the class before Layer 8 with OSINT Curious, and then I will be talking at Layer 8 about maritime OSINT, so that crosses over with what you were talking about, Jane. So it'll be kind of a carry-on to the blog that I put out, so a lot of additional information.
Awesome. All right. And for those of you that don't know, watch our Twitter account, OSINT Curious, or just go ahead and visit our page. We have a whole bunch of information about a one-day training that we're giving at Layer 8. It's actually the day before Layer 8 in June. And right now there's a 20% off code if you're interested. Class is filling up fast, so get your spot reserved. Nico, Dutch OSINT guy, any last words?
No, nothing. I'll be teaching this week, and for the English-speaking people, 9th of July, I'll be doing a workshop, Advanced Searching and Monitoring within Google, and of course, the SANS SEC 487 is still up for live online teaching.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of that, let's go to Gumshoe. John, do you have anything that you want to mention?
Yeah, I have an upcoming class I'm scheduled to teach, SEC 487, starting on June 8th. That's a 2-week class. And I also will be on, I'm not sure when it'll be out in the next week or two, the Recorded Future Research Team Weekly podcast talking about Fin7 and organized cybercrime.
Nice.
Awesome.
Nice. Wow, you both teach 487. Who would have thought it? Lorand, tell us what you've got going on the next couple of weeks.
Nothing major except for hopefully finishing the analysis on this bot network. So if you're interested in it, I will hopefully drop it on Twitter at some point this week.
And she snuck in here a little bit late, but Chris Kubecka, one of our advisory board members, I want to give you an opportunity to speak. Did you have anything that's upcoming from you that you want to post about and talk about?
Yes, I'll be doing a fireside chat. I guess the keynote, so to speak, at the behest of the German Foreign Ministry to discuss attacks that we've been having on critical infrastructure during the COVID pandemic, and some of the nation states that have been doing some of those attacks.
All right. And last but certainly not least, Jane, is there anything that you want us to know or parting thought before we take off?
Well, definitely check out the Verification Handbook. Find me on Twitter, but most importantly, As journalists, we work from tips. So if there's anything that you see that you think a journalist ought to know, my DMs are open, my email's in my bio, and I am on Signal. So please send it my way.
Cool. And we will provide Jane's contact information as far as a link to her Twitter and a link to her BuzzFeed profile in the show notes when this goes live. Thank you so much for being here again. I've been your host, one of your hosts, Micah Hoffman. I'm also teaching SANS classes, but you already know about that. So I'm just going to say thanks for coming, everybody, and stay OSINT curious. Goodbye, everybody.